Begin with a big development coming in the Iran-Israel war. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he will consider traveling to West Asia to help broker a nuclear deal with Iran.
Now, speaking at the G7 summit in Canada, Trump further said that he was talking on the phone, but it's always better to talk in person. Listen into what the U.S. president had to say when a reporter asked him if he would travel to West Asia for a nuclear deal with Iran.
Mr. President, would you consider traveling to the Mideast as part of any talks if it would help broker a deal with Iran?
Yeah, but I think we're doing pretty well. We're talking.
So you don't think you'll
We have a thing called the telephone, so we're talking. It's always better to talk in person.
And this comes after the White House has said that U.S. President will be leaving the G7 summit early due to the Israel-Iran war. Now, White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt wrote on social media X that Trump will be leaving after dinner with heads of state due to the war situation.
For more on this, we're now being joined live by Anthony Lowenstein. He is an independent journalist and the author of The Palestine Laboratory. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you.
Now, just to begin with, of course, I want to begin by asking you what your assessment of the situation in West Asia is, and also some of the comments that we're hearing from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What he says is that an assassination of Khamenei would end the war in West Asia. How do you assess these?
I mean, we're in an incredibly dark, worrying time where we have Israel essentially calling for the assassination of a sovereign nation. None of this has to do with how one feels about the Iranian regime, which has been repressive for decades. I've spent time in the country reporting many years ago, but this was an unprovoked attack a few days ago. It was based on the premise, a false premise, that Israel said that there was an imminent chance of Iran having and developing and building and using a nuclear weapon. A few months ago, the US itself declared that there was no evidence that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. Israel has provided zero evidence that that is different, that that is changed. So we're in a situation now where the only person who can probably end this is Trump. And it's pretty clear in the last days, based on the sources I've spoken to and other reporting, that the US was in some way involved in the Israeli strike. I'm not talking about militarily, but certainly assisted in the defense of Israel when Iran fired missiles back. And it seems pretty clear now that there was a degree of subterfuge that was pushed by Israel and therefore the US. So the idea that Trump is somehow a peacemaker is absurd. On the other hand, the only person who can probably stop this madness is Trump. And these messages that are warning 10 million citizens of Tehran to flee is an absurdity. I mean, where are they supposed to go? The roads are blocked leaving Tehran, and other places in Iran are being attacked by Israel. So we're in a really, really dark place at the moment.
Absolutely. I was actually going to come to that. Now, he just has told Iranians to evacuate. U.S. is sending additional support to Iran. Pentagon has said that they're going to align with its warships in West Asia. And Trump still believes that he'll be able to get Iran come to the table for a deal, where Iran has clearly said that there's no choice for diplomacy right now. How do you assess U.S.'s move here now?
I mean, the US is, as usual, whether it's Trump or Biden or previous presidents, are playing a duplicitous game where if there is a serious desire to end this war, you put pressure on the main belligerent, Israel, to stop firing missiles at Iran. And the US, from what we can tell, is not doing this. I mean, when Trump is asked about this in the last days, he gives contradictory answers. On the one hand, yes, I think there could be a deal on the table. What is the deal? I mean, there's been negotiations between the US and Iran for the last months. All indications were they were moving in a good direction. There were differences between the parties, to be sure. And the ultimate question seems to be that Israel is now saying, and has been saying for months or frankly years, that Iran is not allowed to have any kind of nuclear development. Legally, under international law, Iran has the right to do that, not to build a nuclear weapon, which, by the way, no one talks about the fact that Israel has undeclared nuclear weapons, at least 200, which are not being examined, which are not being investigated, which are not being inspected by any investigator. So the idea that a state Israel, which does not have any kind of transparency around its own nuclear weapons, is proclaiming about non-existent nuclear weapons in Iran is an absurdity. And I think too much of the international community, Europe, the US, my country, Australia, is ignoring this pretty clear fact.
Mr. Lowenstein, you raised some pertinent issues there. Of course, we've been discussing this as well. And in fact, some of the experts that we've been speaking to also have said that you cannot possibly bomb Iran's nuclear program out of existence. And if we were to just talk about the preemptive strikes which are carried out by Israel, do you see this perhaps as a breakdown of the preemptive defense model and also the breakdown of the red lines defense model in West Asia right now?
Absolutely. I mean, is it a complete collapse in any kind of red lines? I mean, every serious international law expert in the last days has said that this Israeli attack was illegal from day one. I mean, let's be clear. Israel has been wanting, when I say Israel, Netanyahu and many people around him, for literally 30 or 40 years to attack Iran. And if you look at these headlines since pretty much the 1980s or 90s, they are always saying the same thing. Iran is on the verge of a nuclear weapon. There's been zero evidence of that ever happening. And we all remember, those of us with a long memory, 2002, 2003, around the Iraq War, where Israel, the US, many Western allies alleged that Iraq, Saddam Hussein, had nuclear weapons. No nuclear weapons were found. Zero. It was a war based on a lie, and around 1 million Iraqis were killed in the process. We are at the similar point here, 20 plus years after. None of this is to deny Iran's repression, authoritarianism. None of that is to deny that. I have Iranian friends who loathe this regime with a passion because they themselves are being negatively impacted either outside Iran or within. However, virtually everyone I speak to is saying none of that means that we support strikes on Iran, because if the Iranian regime collapses tomorrow, next week, there is no plan. What happens to the 90 million Iranians who are facing a deeply uncertain future? There are many pro-US and pro-Israel Iranian forces claiming that they will represent Iran or they will run Iran. They have no legitimacy within Iran itself. So whenever people see this in the media, that pro-war Iranians, either in Iran or outside, are talking about supporting Israeli strikes, remember, none of these groups have any legitimacy or support within Iran itself. So the day after, like we're seeing in Gaza, where there is still no day after, where this is ongoing massacres and genocide has been continuing for nearly a year, there is no plan. So to believe the US or Israel or European states that somehow these strikes on Iran are legitimate are wholly inappropriate and wrong.
Right, and that being said, Israel has so far been able to defend, but it has also got some casualties on their side. Can it actually prolong and go forward with it, even with the support? That is, of course, another question. And how are Israelis taking this? Because, I mean, even if the casualties, if they say that they have bomb shelters, 2 people were killed in bomb shelters, can Israel actually risk prolonging this war?
That's a very good question. I mean, at the moment, there seems to be a so-called rallying around the flag by the majority of Israeli Jews. Obviously, I'm putting aside Palestinians, both in the West Bank and Gaza and in Israel itself, because as many of your viewers might be aware, in many of the Arab towns within Israel, there are no bomb shelters. They don't exist because of Israel's discriminatory Jewish supremacy policies. So a number of Arabs have been killed in the last days because they have nowhere to run to. They have nowhere to seek shelter. Look, within Israel itself, there is opposition. There are a number of people I know who are deeply opposed to what Israel is doing, this belief somehow that you can bomb your way to freedom. But at the moment, it appears to be, as much as one can assess, and I've spent a lot of time in Israel over the years, including a number of months ago, that there is a general support for what Netanyahu government is doing, despite the fact that that government itself is increasingly unpopular. I think a lot of Israelis, what they're reading in the Israeli media is, frankly, a lot of propaganda, that somehow Israel's fighting a war for its existence, it's an existential crisis. None of this is true. And unless you are reading more critical analysis or news, you are, as an Israeli Jew, believing somehow that these attacks are going to make you safer. And it's worth saying this briefly. I speak to you as a Jewish person. I'm Australian and German, but also a Jew. And the idea somehow that Israeli actions are making Jews globally, but certainly within Israel, safer, is a delusion. That military power does not in the end bring you safety alone. And that's what Israel and Israelis are going to be finding out in the coming years and decades ahead.
Mr. Lowenstein, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA with your assessment on this. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.